You know that moment when you're lying in bed at night and your mind suddenly becomes incredibly clear about your future? Everything feels sharp, almost cinematic. You can see the work you'll do, the life you'll build, the version of you that finally feels calm, confident, and certain. It's not vague, it's detailed. You can almost feel what a normal day in that life would be like, and for a few minutes it feels real, like you've already stepped into it. But then the next day comes and nothing changes. No action, no real movement, just the same routine quietly repeating itself. And over time, it's easy to start thinking maybe this means something about you, like you're not disciplined enough or not serious enough about your goals. But what psychologists have been quietly observing for years suggests something much deeper is happening beneath the surface. Here's what makes this interesting. Your brain doesn't always treat imagination as something separate from reality. When you vividly picture a goal, especially in emotional detail, your mind can release a small sense of reward, almost like you've already made progress. It's subtle, but you can feel it, a quiet sense of relief, a feeling that you're already on your way. And because that feeling is satisfying, it can reduce the urgency to actually begin. So instead of pushing you forward, your imagination gently pulls you into a space where progress feels real, even when nothing has actually happened yet. And if you think about it in terms of mental energy, it starts to make even more sense. Your mind runs on a limited supply of attention and effort. Every time you imagine your future in detail, you're using part of that supply. You're thinking, planning, visualizing, emotionally engaging. And by the time it's time to act, you feel strangely tired, not physically exhausted, but mentally drained in a quiet, hard-to-explain way. It's like you've already done the work in your head, and now there's less energy left to do it in real life. Now here's where things become a bit counterintuitive. The people who dream the biggest often experience this the most, not because they lack ambition, but because their imagination is more immersive. They don't just think about success in abstract terms, they see it clearly, they feel it emotionally, they mentally rehearse it. And because of that, their brain gives them a stronger sense of completion before they've even taken the first step. What looks like inaction on the outside can actually be a kind of internal overload on the inside. But there's another layer to this that people don't always talk about. It's not just about imagination, it's about pressure. When your dreams start to carry meaning, when they become tied to your identity, everything shifts. It's no longer just about achieving something, it becomes about proving something. Proving that you're capable, that your potential is real, that the version of yourself you keep imagining actually exists. And that kind of meaning adds weight, often more than you consciously realize. So now starting doesn't feel simple anymore. It doesn't feel like a small step. It feels like a test, a moment where your imagination meets reality. And reality can be unpredictable. It can be messy. It can fall short of what you expected. And that possibility creates hesitation, not because you don't care, but because you care deeply. Your mind isn't trying to stop you, it's trying to protect you from something it perceives as a risk. Here's the part most people overlook. When your goals become closely tied to your sense of self, failure stops feeling like feedback and starts feeling personal. It begins to feel like it says something about who you are, and that's a heavy thing to carry. So instead of moving forward, your mind keeps you in safer territory, planning, thinking, learning, preparing, all of which feel productive, and in some ways they are, but they don't quite close the gap between intention and action. Something subtle happens at this stage. You begin to confuse thinking with doing. You watch another video, refine your ideas, reorganize your plans, and it creates the feeling of progress. And that feeling is convincing, but deep down there's a quiet awareness that something is missing, a sense that you're moving mentally but not physically. And that gap can feel uncomfortable, which often leads you back into imagination, where things feel clearer and more controlled. Now, to where it gets psychologically interesting again, there's something known as the identity gap. It's the distance between who you are right now and who you believe you need to be to live out your dreams. And when that gap feels too wide, your brain interprets it as a kind of emotional risk. Because stepping into that future means stepping into uncertainty. It means risking failure, misalignment, or even discovering that the dream isn't exactly what you thought it would be. So instead of moving forward imperfectly, you stay still in a place that feels familiar, even if that familiarity comes with frustration, even if part of you knows you're capable of more. This doesn't mean you lack motivation. If anything, it often means the opposite. You care deeply, you think deeply, and you imagine vividly. And sometimes that combination creates more internal resistance than most people realize. If these ideas resonate with you, you might find value in exploring more psychology like this. Subscribing helps this kind of content reach people who may need to hear it quietly, at the right moment, just like you are right now. There's one more layer to this that often goes unnoticed. Action requires a certain level of clarity, not perfect clarity, but enough to move forward. And when your mind is filled with too many possibilities, too many directions, too many expectations, it struggles to choose. So instead of choosing imperfectly, it chooses not to move at all. Not because it can't, but because it doesn't want to commit to the wrong version of the future. And that can keep you in a loop, thinking, imagining, delaying, and then returning to thinking again. It feels like preparation, but it slowly turns into avoidance. Not intentional avoidance, but protective avoidance. The kind that keeps you safe from disappointment, but also quietly keeps you from progress. And sometimes simply understanding this pattern begins to change how you see yourself, not as someone who lacks discipline or consistency, but as someone whose mind is carrying more than it knows how to translate into action. That shift in perspective doesn't solve everything overnight, but it softens the judgment you place on yourself. It creates space for awareness instead of criticism. And once that awareness is there, something begins to shift quietly. You start noticing when you're escaping into imagination. You start recognizing the difference between thinking and doing, not with pressure, not with frustration, but with a kind of calm observation. And sometimes that's where change actually begins, not through force, but through understanding. If this gave you something to reflect on, you might want to stay around for more ideas like this. There's always another layer beneath what we assume is just behavior, because the psychology of dreaming big but doing nothing isn't really about doing nothing at all. It's about what's happening beneath the surface, in the quiet space between who you are and who you're trying to become. And once you start seeing that clearly, you begin to notice it everywhere, in your habits, in your thoughts, in those moments where you almost begin but don't. And maybe next time that moment shows up, it won't feel like failure. It will feel like something to understand, something worth paying attention to, something that, in its own quiet way, is trying to show you where you are and what you might be ready for next.